Well, good morning and welcome. I'm Newell Arnerich, Mayor of Danville. This is Town Talks on Friday at 9 a.m. on November 4th. And I am absolutely delighted today here as we're celebrating cultural heritage and cultural heritage in Danville. And we have two special guests with us today. We have Florence McCauley, who is here as the president of the Eugene O'Neil Foundation, which you're going to find out who they are, where they are, on one of our hidden jewels in town as it relates to Tao House. And also joining us is Dan Dunn, who's the executive director of the Museum of the San Ramon Valley, commonly called the Depot or the train station. So welcome to both of you.
Good morning, Newell.
Morning.
And good morning, everyone else. Hi, Florence.
So we have about an hour-long program, and as I started this year, just a little tradition, we're going to watch a short 1-minute video. It's kind of like a little promo video to get us going. And then we're going to spend time talking about each of the assets and their unique stories of how they came to be and what great things they offer to our community. So we'll start the video right here. Please let me know if you don't see it or hear it. Well, great. That was just a little warm up to let us know a little bit and give us a preview of things to go. So we're going to start with Florence. And Florence, there's a wonderful story to be told here of something that's out of sight and out of mind. And its story here in Danville starts back in the 1930s. And we know the name, but many people don't know that there is actually a national park in Danville. There are two in Contra Costa County. Everybody knows John Muir House, but there's Tao House. So Florence, can you tell us sort of the story about how did the Irish-American playwright Eugene O'Neil end up here in Danville? Because I think he was originally in Boston, and there's a story about how he got here and what drew him here.
Thank you, Newell. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about Tao House, my most favorite subject. I have been involved in a very long time, and I know the people that started it, which I want to give a big shout out to Danville residents that saved the house. But to go back as to why O'Neil came to Danville, his wife, Carlotta, was from Oakland, and he was had come west to Seattle. And they were looking for a place to settle. Final harbor was the term that was used. And at the time he was in Seattle, he was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature. And that gave him quite a bit of money that he could purchase a home. So they came back to the Bay Area and they saw the property called Corduroy Hills and fell in love with it. And Carlotta said, you know, I want to build a house here. And O'Neil was very much in favor. he needed a place to write, and he needed a place that was quiet, serene, contemplative. And that's what the foundation has tried to continue, that feeling. So we say it's a best kept secret in Danville. Many people do not know that we are there. You mentioned that it's a National Historic Site. It's only one of two that have been named for writers. So we are very fortunate in Danville to have this resort. And we are partners with the National Park Service. The legislation that established the park, which was a result of Lois Sizu and Darlene Blair, who started in Danville, went to the state legislature in California, and then ended up in the federal government with a legislation that was sponsored by George Miller and Senator Cranston. And at that hearing, we had the known actor Jason Robards speak in our behalf. And the legislation indicates that the park is twofold. One, the Park Service is a partner with Eugene O'Neil Foundation, named in the legislation. We are responsible for the artistic programs, which means the festival that we have, the other programs that I will talk about later. And then the Park Service is responsible for the maintenance and for the interpretive work. It was found early on that there was no way that the foundation could take care of the house. It was just too big of a.
It was a very large estate, right? It was originally,
It
I think,
was.
160 acres. Yeah.
Right. It was 116 acres, and now it's down to what is it? 50. I want to say 56, but I'm not sure that that's correct. Anyway, it's a much smaller site, and we do butt up against East Bay Regional Park and surrounded by the East Bay Regional Park.
So he built. Tell us a little bit to back up. So there was Eugene O'Neil and Carlotta. They moved to. I remember he also had tuberculosis. He had found a great doctor in Oakland. He could also ride the train, which we're going to talk about later. He could ride the train, get to Oakland. So when did he show up in Danville? How long did he live there? And then you mentioned there were two people. They were the next purchasers of the house, and nobody else owned it until it became a park. So what was the timing? Who were those players?
They moved to Danville in 1937, and they lived there until 1944, when it became much more difficult to service the house. It was isolated, and the war was intervening, and he was becoming more ill. And the people that started it were, well, there were people that lived in the house, okay, and then they decided to sell, and the house was on the market for $250,000. Can you believe that?
Wow, all those acres.
Yeah, I wish. And at the time I thought, oh my God, I wish. Anyway, they got the word that a builder was going to put condominiums or houses on the land, and he was going to destroy the house. And so these people stepped up and were able to put a down payment, a very small down payment, and then they raised the money to make a further down payment. And that the production with Jason Robards in Berkeley raised $40,000 for us to do that. Did it free of charge. It was just, a fantastic thing. And then they moved the production. It was Huey, and they moved the production to Southern California and did another free performance. So that's how they got there. And I always want to say, if it weren't for the community, and we're so fortunate to live in a community where people are active. I wish they were more active at this time than before. I don't know there are many reasons for that, but these people were aware. And if it weren't for Darlene and Lois, and Thea Brewer was another one, we would not have the historic site. So I'm eternally grateful.
Yeah, it's a crown jewel, and once you were at the site, and to tell the story, the reason why it's a little out of sight, it is restricted access because it became a gated community based on some issues in the area. So the way you get to there is you go to the Museum of the San Ramon Valley, and the Park Service has a free shuttle that takes you back and forth there. So it's really easy to get there. You don't have to drive. It is a very narrow road. And that's one of the attractions, as you said, why Eugene O'Neil liked this site, because there was virtually nobody up the hill up there. And he had this uninterrupted view of Mount Diablo, and his office that he used to write in looked directly at Mount Diablo. And so he had sort of a commanding view. And he built this humble style home. And as an architect, I say very humble, very simply furnished, but with great thoughtfulness. And it's really a joy to go through that to understand it. But there's another little story about getting his furniture.
I was
A very famous actress who helped. Can you tell us because when you go there, particularly his office looks just like the Life magazine photographs. It looks, you're looking around the room when you enter it going, where's Eugene? Because it looks like he could be sitting there. So tell us that story.
Oh, those wonderful stories. So when the Park Service took over the property, there was no furniture in the house. So when the O'Neills left, most of the furniture had been purchased from Gump's, and it went back to Gump's. And of course, through the years, many of those artifacts have been, dispersed around. So one of the things that we were looking for was the bed. So the bed is called an opium bed. And if those people in the audience remember, it used to be at Gump's on the top floor. And so when you got off the elevator, right in front of you was a huge Buddha. And that Buddha was sitting on this bed.
Yeah.
And so we traced the bed we talked to Gump's, and we found out that it was in Dallas. And they were not interested at all in returning that to us. So we had a person by the name of Carol Jones who lived in Diablo at the time. And she said, well, I'm just going to write to one of our honorary board members, Katharine Hepburn. We said, okay, go right ahead, write to Katharine Hepburn. So she did. And Katharine Hepburn nicely wrote a letter to Gump's and said, dear Mr. Gump's, give them the bed. And they did. So then trying to get it up to Tao House was hilarious because it would not fit into the door. So they had to bring it up through the back of the house, well, the part of the house that faces Mount Diablo. They had to bring it up over the balcony and in through Carlotta's room that way. And it stands there today. The desk was found in Texas too. We have been very, very helpful, I think, in the early years, researching. And of course, the Park Service has a place called Harper's Ferry that does all the research on houses like this, or anything that they need furnishing. So the furnishings are very reminiscent, if not identical, to the ones that the O'Neills had. The hardest one to get at this point, or has always been, the Cormel screen, which is in the living room. And they could not find an exact replica. So it's a little different, but it's the same style. But a lot of work.
It is, but it's so appreciated because it is like viewing this man was humble.
Yeah.
It was simple in his approach to life and very philosophical in many ways. And you immediately feel that when you're walking through there, because it does have the look like he's just outside waiting to come back in after you leave. But you mentioned research. So there's two aspects of the Eugene O'Neil Foundation, and it's really the keeper of many treasures. So tell us a little bit about the research and the library side, and then we're going to go and talk about the festivals.
Okay, well, what we had a person on our board, Travis Bogart, who was professor emeritus at UC Berkeley of theater, and he was an O'Neil scholar, and he convened a group of experts as to what we should do up at Tao House. How should we prolong the mission of O'Neil to American theater, and how should we do that? So what they developed a plan, which is still in place today. Our mission is to continue the legacy of O'Neil through different programs. And one of the things that we have is a research library for scholars, and it's open to the public by appointment. We have been the beneficiaries of several collections by O'Neil scholars. One is the most valuable, and it is a collection of letters that were written between O'Neil and Sophus Winther. And Sophus Winther was a very good friend that lived in Seattle, and they renewed that friendship when they were up there. And no one has those letters. They are ours. We have them, and we just had a artist in residence fellow who came to continue writing a book on the Kandinsky theater in Russia. And she found a gold mine in those letters. She found photographs, letters, she was so excited. I went up there the day after she came, and there was a smile on her face. She said, "I can't believe what I found." So that is one of the things that is so important to us, is continuing that legacy.
And she was able to connect all of the dots then.
Yes.
She had parts of the pieces, but
Exactly.
having the original documentation and being able to go through that, because nobody's really cataloged and wrote about it in the depth that she did. So that's fantastic.
Yes, and she said that one of the things that is so important here is because the Russian government no longer lets those kind of documents leave.
Right.
So being able to retrieve some of that information was so valuable to her. And she will most likely come back again for another couple of weeks to continue her study.
So when you look at Eugene O'Neil, he's not as well known today because many of his plays aren't, but he was the Picasso of new theater and of a new form of communication. But in his day, he was one of the most well-known, prolific playwrights. Not only won a Nobel Prize, was it 3 or 4 Pulitzer Prizes, but his roots. And what finally I remember the famous quote was, that they were trying to figure out, how do you understand him and everything? And I think he told a reporter once, she says, I'm Irish, or something to the effect that you have to know that I'm Irish. And which reminds me of our connection. So his family originally came from New Ross, Ireland, which wonderfully about 5 years ago, through one of your fellow board members, and with the backing of the foundation, brought the town of Danville and New Ross, which is in County Wexford, Ireland, together, because that's their ancestral home where they came from. And so we made this wonderful connection. And so born of that, there's a festival that had been happening in another city about Eugene O'Neil. And of course, it's been happening for several decades here in Danville, and brought together the idea of one festival, 2 countries. So tell us a little bit about what role does Eugene O'Neil in the outward facing to the general public and producing plays, and what's your mission and what's next on your list?
Wow, those are loaded questions. Our mission, as I mentioned previously, is to continue the legacy of Eugene O'Neil to American theater. So what he did was, before the time it was vaudeville kind of things, very elaborate,
Melodramatic.
no substance. And so he came on the scene, and substance, talking about the human condition. So that is really where he spent his time and his career, on studying the human condition. Many people say that he's so dour. There is levity in his plays. There is humor in his plays.
Yes.
You have to.
Now, you say that, but you have to find it, and you have to understand.
You have
Yes.
to pay attention, because he is a poet in many aspects, a poet. So what we try to do is we bring an O'Neil play in the festival, which you mentioned, which celebrated 25 years this last September. So we have our artistic director, Eric Fraser Hayes, touts that we have done more O'Neil than anyone else in American theater.
Well done.
And I think that's something to be very proud of.
Absolutely.
And so what we are trying to do, you mentioned the best kept secret, and I mentioned that, is to bring Tao House down the hill as much as we can. It is a hard place to get to. As you mentioned, it is shuttle, and we are only allowed to do so many things up there per year in the agreement that we have with homeowners. So we try to continue the legacy of O'Neil through the festival, through education. We have education programs for high school students that we have in the summer. And then we have the artist in residence program.
Yeah.
We also have a day use program. And I really want to impress upon you, you talk about the cultural heritage of the town. This is an ingredient that we think is very important. We have started a day use program, which is only for East Bay residents, and it continues to be full. We have filled every single slot every time we open it up for applications. People from Danville, people from San Ramon, people from Dublin, people from Berkeley.
That's great.
People from Walnut Creek, people from Concord. One of our board members has been there several times and is trying to complete a detective story. So I wish him well.
That's great.
So that's what we do.
That's great. Well, now we kind of know up the hill overlooking, Eugene O'Neil did pick part of this, from what I understand, that because there was a train here. Well, that train was here, obviously, when he came in the late 1930s. The train actually came here in 1891, and that changed the face of the valley, because the train was coming, and I recall there was John Hart's, local resident here, who got the idea to buy up all the property, which we now know as Hart's Avenue and downtown. He subdivided because the train's going to come, people are going to move here. And so the train got built, Danville Hotel was built 1891, and we fast forward, and it's the backbone. This was an agricultural area and getting goods and services here, because this was clay soil. You couldn't move a horse, you couldn't move a wagon, you couldn't hardly walk as a human being because of the type of clay we had here. So having a railroad and having paved roads, but soon after the 1890 came along, electric streetcars and electric trains were real popular. And so the train fell off a little bit in its passenger service, but we had the Danville trolley that ran from right down Hart's Avenue, stopped just almost, not quite all the way to where the Vine is or Bridges Restaurant, but short of that, and it'd head back to Saranap in Walnut Creek, and then you get on there, you could go to San Francisco, you could go all over the Bay Area from that. But so the Southern Pacific came through, and they built this series of stations that were absolutely identical. And they were identical, so that way if personnel went from one to the other, they knew how to operate them, and everything ran the same, and they painted them the same color. And lo and behold, they went by the wayside. So here in Danville, I think it was 1978 was the last time the trains came through. And there sat this dilapidated station. So Dan Dunn is well known to our community, was the director for many, many years of the Blackhawk Museum, and he was graciously agreed to help us out and help run the museum. So Dan, why don't you tell us a little bit about what's going on? How did you get involved, and any sort of part of the history that you want to share about the museum?
Sure. Thanks, Newell, and good morning. And good morning again, Florence. And thank you for having me on. You gave a very great background on the railroad and the electric trolleys and everything else that came through Danville. When I was a board member here, this building sat where Lenardi's was. It had a big chain link fence around it. And I was told that they were thinking about moving the depot, this building that had gone through being a depot and then gone through other stages in life as a feed and grain store, and then a private residence, and had fallen upon some pretty rough days. So it was agreed that we would, there's the picture, that we would pick the depot up and move it to the corner of Prospect and Railroad Avenue, a distance of only a few hundred yards, but moving a building from 1891 down Railroad Avenue would be an event, and it was. We were happy to get it in and put it on a permanent foundation. It had the typical 19th century foundation of kind of brickwork and other things that had been repaired many, many times. And then to restore the building to its current state. And fortunately for us now, Railroad Avenue has become a major thoroughfare and a major walk-around area in Danville. So we occupy a very prominent place in the downtown.
And you became sort of two things. You also, because of that prominence, the farmers market that's there, and that happened to be the place that got designated to be able to pick up with the National Park Service to go up to Tao House that Florence was talking about earlier. But also you became kind of the visitor center of town, that people walking around, you have that role.
Yeah, we are the official visitor center for the town of Danville, and we're very happy to have people come in, see our exhibits, see what we do, and then pick up literature, the town's calendar of events, the town's booklets, walk around maps. We get asked where people can go to lunch or where people can go to dinner. We actually stock the menus of a lot of the restaurants around us. So we can answer those questions. And we're happy to do that. We are happy to be the official pickup spot for Florence McCauley's Eugene O'Neil House. And we stock their literature. So while people are waiting for the van to pick them up, they get to look through literature for Tao House. They get to look through literature for the other national park sites, Rosie the Riveter, John Muir. We have something for Port Chicago. Right. So in that sense, we fulfill our mission of being the official visitor center for Danville and helping people navigate the downtown.
Well done. Now, a lot of people think, particularly children walk by, say, "Oh, that's the train museum." Let's tell this story about really what's the role, purpose. Is it just a museum for trains? I know the answer, but I want you to tell us.
Yeah,
it's okay. Tell us about some of the things that go on there.
We get called a lot of different things. We are the train museum. We are the children's museum. We are the railroad depot. We are the Museum of the San Ramon Valley, which is actually our name. You know, you had mentioned earlier, Newell, the importance of a place like a railroad depot. And I want to back up on that one. I went to school in the South, and the steamboat landings in the South were the place that the world came into town and the world left town. In this case, the depot was that place. Anything that was produced in town, the agricultural goods, the goods from the ranches, the goods from the downtown businesses, left via the train. And anything that came into town, the mail, the newspapers, the news of the world, things that were being bought by people that lived in town, came into the depot. So it really became the center of, like steamboat landings, it became the center of the town's commerce, and everything that left and came in that way. Our current mission is to collect, preserve, and present to the public the history of the San Ramon Valley. I think in the background behind me, you can see a lot of our collection rooms. We collect everything from hat pins to pianos, to two buildings, the 1891 Railroad Depot that I'm sitting in at the moment, and our 1888 Tassajara Grammar School schoolhouse, about 7 miles outside of town. And so people use us for research, for exhibition work that we do. They will come in and look at our documents, works on paper, photographs, maps, artwork that we have, textiles. We've done shows using our textiles on wedding gowns for 100 years. And so behind me right now, our textile room is open, and you can start to see some of the things that are in there. We have musical instruments, we have children's toys, and we use a lot of these in exhibition. And again, people use us as research.
So you've had really an amazing collection, and I know there's a warehouse and trying to get a bigger warehouse built, because as times went on that you've been able to collect things. But the stories that you've told here is not only about the Valley, about California, and why did Danville come to be? Danville really kind of grew out largely because of the gold rush, and it was a stopping place. In order to get to the gold rush, to the foothills, you had two directions. This was one of the ways, but depending upon the time of year, you weren't going to travel far because of the soil, and the Central Valley flooded to such a great extent that it was really impassable at times. But there's been stories and exhibits that you've had not only about the local things, but you've had on the people who built the railroads. So the Chinese labor camps, and how did the Chinese immigration, it was forced labor, to tell that story, to tell the story of the Japanese internment. You know, our community, we're all from someplace else. You know, my family's from another part of the world, and we ended up here. And so the museum has taken a role to tell those stories. And Dan, share some of those with us that you've had in the past, and what are you looking at in the future?
Sure. As you know, in your video at the beginning, you saw a couple of the exhibits that we have done. The Japanese American internment camp experience from World War II. And we do fall back on our mission of presenting the history of the Valley. But in a lot of ways, the history of the Valley is wrapped up in national issues and indeed global issues. So in our case, the Japanese internment camp experience came from the fact that in 1942, a lot of our residents were forced to remove to Gila River in Arizona for an internment camp. And so the Japanese businesses and the Japanese students that were in San Ramon High School all of a sudden disappeared. Many never came back. So that was an experience that we wanted to talk about. We also wanted to talk about the railroad, the Transcontinental Railroad, and how it got built. And knowing that we have a pretty good sized Japanese American or Chinese American community in Danville and in the Valley, it was a way for us to lever that conversation in about what happened to the railroad workers after they completed their work on the Transcontinental. many of them did come back to the areas like Danville. A lot of the ranchers in this area hired those former workers on the Transcontinental to work on their ranches and farms. So that was a story that we wanted to tell. And my personal experiences with both the Japanese American exhibit and the railroad worker exhibit was that we had people that came in and actually thanked us for doing an exhibit on the railroad workers, because their kids get a phrase in a textbook that that there were such people as Chinese railroad workers and working on the transcontinental. So in a lot of ways, we were able to bring those stories to life. And I've got one more quick one for you, where on the 100th anniversary of the end of the First World War in 2018, we participated and put an exhibit together in a national program called the Bells of Peace program, where on the 11th hour, the 11th day, the 11th month in 2018, we had the churches in town ring their bells and did a program with the Veterans Building down the street. We borrowed a lot of equipment from them, from their collections, and Dublin, and actually Richmond. The Richmond Museum as well supplied things to us. And we told the story locally of 2 local Danville men and 1 local Danville woman who were caught up in World War I. Neither of the 2 men survived the war, but the nurse did. And so once again, we were able to take a global story and bring it back to the San Ramon Valley.
It's a rich partnership, not only with Eugene O'Neil Tao House, with the Historical Society, but bringing together events and things that help form us as a place. Why were we here? Why did we end up here? And you have some really traditional events you do. You do actually do a train theme event. Tell us about some of the coming up in the future here. What are the exhibits that we're seeing now, and what do you see in the next 12 months?
We are just wrapping up our annual exhibit on and program for 4th grade students on California's First Peoples. This is a Native American program that has been longstanding with us. We have changed it over the years to keep up with new research and new materials that we have had available to us. But it does talk about the first residents of the San Ramon Valley, what their lifestyle was like, what the trade routes were like, what they did, how they lived. And it helps hopefully debunk a little bit of the typical teepee out on the prairie kind of view of the Native American experience. So that's wrapping up right now. We do a holiday exhibit each year, which talks about some traditions of the holidays. Last year, we did an exhibit on the Chinese New Year tradition. This year, our exhibit will focus on international dolls and toys, which should be a lot of fun for the train fans. We will have a model train. And we do a model train each year, a very elaborate setup during the summer. And so it is an extremely popular exhibit. We wind up with train fans from the ages of 5 to 90-year-olds who come in to look at our model railroad. And it runs the entire summer, literally runs. We operate for all the hours that we're open. It's a great exhibit. And coming up in January, at the end of January, beginning of February, we're actually looking at the COVID experience. We began collecting COVID material when the pandemic started, asking people to bring in objects, things that they made, things that they wrote, if they wrote poetry, wrote letters, anything to help document this particular time. And to expand on that a little bit, we are opening a quilt exhibit. Stir Crazy Quilts, Poland,
Oh, I love
quilting during the pandemic. And so we are busily selecting quilts that were done during the pandemic. Some of them are humorous. Some of them are very, very elaborate. So for the 2.5 years or so that people have had to stay home, a lot of them were quilting, and we're going to be doing an exhibit on what they did during that time.
I've seen sort of a preview of what those look like. Sort of one last thing, Dan. I mean, it's exciting to see the variety, but it's the thoughtfulness that I'm so impressed with that goes into each curation for each exhibit. It's the amount of research, the accuracy, and trying to make sure the things that are represented there are true, real, if not, in fact, specifically from this area. But there's another part of kind of on the education side that the museum does, and it was the one-room schoolhouse.
Mhm.
Tell us the story about that, and then I'm going to come back to Florence and talk about something that both of you share.
Okay, so our 1888 schoolhouse out on Tassahara Road. You saw the building in, again, Newell's preview. We became associated with that actually before my time here. We had a couple, Don and Joan Kurtz, that when the schoolhouse was still in the property of the fire district, began a program for third grade students in the Valley, where they would go out to the schoolhouse as a class, and they would get a experience of what a day would be like for their predecessors in 1888. The curriculum is true to what the curriculum would have been. They use McGuffey readers. McGuffey supplied the schools of the 19th century. And I'm sorry to say that McGuffey ceased operations about 1.5 years ago.
Yeah.
So
Amazing.
they were long-term publishers of school textbooks, and we use them. They do their arithmetic on handheld chalkboards. Penmanship is with quill and ink. Pencils existed, but they came back, they were from the East, so they probably were pretty pricey. So we imagine the school would have used quill and ink. Everything that is in that program is authentic, including the building that it's in, to its age, the recess, games that are played. There won't be any cell phones. There are no iPads. It is walking on stilts, playing hoops and jacks and things that the children would have been playing from 1888. The only, I'll give you this one, the only thing that is not true to the time is that we use non-staining ink in those ink wells. And you can figure out why.
Yeah, exactly. It is really a robust, wonderful program. And so exciting that the program is back, as it was on a hiatus due to COVID and all of that. So really exciting. So I'm going to share a screen here again with an image of this is what I see as another connection between not only the Museum of the San Ramon Valley and the depot, but this is the image of the barn that's up at Tao House that's used to have plays, particularly during the summer. And I also recall going several times, and even recently, to plays that are held inside the Museum of the San Ramon Valley. Maybe I'll go to you first, Florence. Tell us what happens in here. What's the story behind the barn?
Well, the story behind the barn, it is an original barn to the site. It was there before the O'Neills. And we needed a place for performances. And so through the years, it has been renovated, so to speak. It is still historical. So the only thing that we have been able to do are put lighting in there, and that has been through a grant that we received with partners of the National Park Service. It's called Volunteers in the Park. And so that is where we have our performances, and we have in the past had performances downtown. And I'm very, very pleased to say that we are partners with the museum for a performance that we have done. I don't know, Dan, how many years? It's been at least 10.
At least. Mhm.
Yeah. So January 14th, 15th, we will be doing that again. They give us the space. We don't have to pay for the space. So all of our ticket sales help fund the foundation's programs. So on January 14th, 15th, the play will be The First Man. There's another, oh, I love that picture.
That's
I love that picture. So the first performance we had up there, Newell, I will say, was the most magical I have ever experienced, and we tried to duplicate that. It was Moon for the Misbegotten, which is what we did this year.
Okay. And
The seating was outside. We had risers, we had chairs. It was a fundraiser, and the Oregon Shakespeare Players came down and did that for us. And the moon did its thing, and it was just magical. We wanted to have Moon outside this year for it to do its thing, but decided that that probably was not a good idea. And it turned out that it would have been a disaster because it rained.
Right.
So we are partners with the museum, and we could not do half of what we do without our partners. And I will have to say that the town of Danville has been so helpful in so many ways with us. We got the grant that you gave us last year that has enabled us to purchase some things that we would not have been able to do any other way. And one of those is a signage that we worked with. It was Dan's idea. What about putting a sign in front of the museum that talks about the foundation? I went, oh, wow, let's do that. So the town has been wonderful in walking us through that process. So that signage is going to give a little background about the foundation, but also upcoming events that will be changed as programs change.
We're excited. That's great. There's one other small aspect, and I'm thinking of the downtown, and this is something that the Eugene O'Neil Foundation board worked on for many years, and it cost a great deal of money, but you partnered with the town of Danville to build, I don't want to say a monument, but it is in a way. It's we call it one of our little the Front Street Pocket Park. It's across the street from the library, and it tells the wonderful story in the most O'Neil fashion. It's simple and everything. Tell us about what that was and how did that idea come to be?
Well, we call it The Veil, and it is a monologue from Long Day's Journey into Night. And back in the time when I think Claudia Niemer was president of the foundation, that we really would like to bring something downtown that shows that O'Neil lived here and what he did. And so they did go to the town, and the town said, fine, just show us what you plan to do. So we raised the money. It was $25,000 that the foundation raised. And now we have this wonderful, I call it, I guess you could call it a memorial, but I call it a story.
Yes.
Because it has the plays that O'Neil did wrote up at Tao House in beautiful oops.
The dog.
Someone at the front door. In storybook form, in addition to The Veil. And We had a little problem with that this year, and the town stepped up again and repaired the damage that was done. And I still can't believe that, but they did a wonderful job, and we are so grateful. It was done in time for the new Ross people to come.
Yeah.
And it was wonderful. There it is. Oh, yes.
So it's playbills. So what makes this a wonderful, it's a place that is for reflection. You'll see people sitting there every day across from the library. It does look towards Mount Diablo, and if you turn around, look backwards, but it has the playbills almost as though you were in a movie theater and you'd be handed a playbill, and it tells the story of Eugene O'Neil and his time, particularly here in Danville. And the veil, what I would call, are the words. I don't have that photograph there, but it's a surprise opportunity to, while you're at the library, walk across the street. You really don't see it till you get to the other side. And it tells really a wonderful story of what is here in Danville, and memorializes Eugene O'Neil, because we know him through words, and there's a bronze casting of his words. And that quote, what is that one from?
Long Day's Journey into Night.
There you go. And pretty exciting to see that come to be. And yes, during COVID, the town of Danville did have a little damage, as we're not sure who did it, but rest assured, we have security systems in place now that will help prevent that. But the artist, it was Michael Manwaring who was hired to come up with the way, and it's one of the first times he ever did this combination of sculpture, the playbills, and the ideas. And he was a graphic artist, and he communicated through words. So for him to take on this assignment was a dream to him, and he executed it in probably one of the best ways. Because originally somebody said, let's have a statue of O'Neil. Well, I don't think O'Neil would like to see a statue of him. That this was something I would say that's who he is. It was his words. It humbles you in a way, and you feel the sensitivity of this man. And we're so fortunate to have had the Life magazine expose that was on Eugene and Carlotta, that was photographed up there, that documented so well, which allowed the foundation and the park to come together to recreate that feeling. And I really encourage you to go up there if you haven't been there. And it doesn't make any difference how old you are, because the story is so compelling to know somebody, the only American playwright to ever receive a Nobel Prize. And he wrote some of his greatest works right here in Danville. And to the large degree spent the last part of his life before he passed away. And Dan, when does the one-room schoolhouse start? I know it's coming up. And if it's for third graders, do we include schools other than opportunities for schools other than the San Ramon Valley?
We do. The one-room schoolhouse actually starts at the end of January and runs into May. And while we include as many different entities as we can, these are the private schools, these are San Ramon Valley public schools, we will kind of try to shoehorn in the homeschool kids when we can into classes that may have some space left over. One of the things that we struggle with, Newell, to be honest, is volunteers here. Right. And so I do want to talk about our need for volunteers, because the more volunteers that we have for all the things that we do, the more things that we can do. And so the one-room schoolhouse could use volunteers, which would allow us to do more classes out there. I mentioned our California First Peoples exhibit, which is actually an exhibit and a fourth grade program at the same time. And again, we could use volunteers to help with that. Volunteers that want to participate with our collections. All of these things are just wonderful opportunities for people to dive into the museum. So the one-room schoolhouse is a great program. One of the things that I didn't mention was that it's been going long enough that we've had now a couple brides who went to the schoolhouse as third graders and have been asked to be allowed to be married at that one-room schoolhouse. So it's
You
been
know, you've
around
been
for
doing it a long
while,
time.
and hopefully with some more volunteers, we can keep it going for a long time.
That's fantastic. You know, when you talk about volunteers, I know when the museum got moved and after the new foundation, the building was lifted, sat there for months, was dropped down, then the real restoration.
Yes.
And I remember at the time, because I know I was one of the volunteers and my wife, I always say we did the south wall, which was the hardest wall, it's still the hardest wall to maintain because it faces the sun and it had been repaired and passed a lot of times. But I know there's a day coming up, actually speaking of the one room schoolhouse, it's on Saturday in November at 9 a.m. looking for volunteers to go out. It's on Finley Road. So if you go out Communitas Sahara heading east, you get to Finley, you make that left-hand turn and you can't miss it. It's on the right-hand side. What's the details and what can people do to help out there?
Sure. It's November the 12th, 9 a.m. start. And it is to prepare the school for the school program to begin. The grounds we're getting a load of gravel that will allow us to refresh the paths of the school, including the areas that the children use for recess. And for the 1888 version of the Pledge of Allegiance, which is a flag salute because the pledge didn't exist at the time. So that's gravel that'll be laid out and some other activities that'll be done to get the school ready. 9 o'clock in the morning. Bring your work gloves because this is hands-on.
Great.
Thank you for coming kind of thing. And if you can bring a couple shovels and a wheelbarrow, you'll be more than welcome.
That's great. And Florence, what kind of volunteers, board members, what kind of things for sort of the human side are you guys looking for and how can people get involved?
We really, we use volunteers, and the more we can get, the more we can do. We operate by committees. And so all the board members are either chair or a member of a committee. And we would love to have community volunteers on these committees. And because it's the way to learn about the foundation. And many times it leads to somebody being interested in being on the board. So you can go to our website, which is EugeneO'Neil.org, and you can see the programs that we have, and you can see opportunities to volunteer. Our newest board member, who will come on board in November, started out that way. Her name is Sarah Kane, and she does editing for us and some graphic work. And she is just invaluable. So they're all different opportunities: graphic work, editing, writing, publicity. We could really use people in that arena to help us spread the word. So like the museum, we operate by volunteers. So important to us in our mission.
And
so
I know
Eric, that opportunity to make that.
Yes, well, and you can sign up at both the museum. There's a contact form. You can go on there that you can send in and say, hey, I'm interested. There's a description there. Tell people, you know, for people listening here, they can sign up and one of the staff members will get back to you. And I tell you what, it's really fun. It doesn't take a lot of effort because there's usually a large number of people. Hopefully it will see out at the one-room schoolhouse. And one of the other crown jewels that's worth mentioning, because he woke me up to Eugene O'Neil, and that's Eric Fraser Hayes, who's the artistic director, who has figured out ways to look at O'Neil in a way, in a 21st century view, but still maintain that human reflection, deep thought, characterizations that Eugene O'Neil was trying to convey. And I know that there is, tickets are going on sale for The First Man, which is obviously by Eugene O'Neil. And those plays are on January 13th, 14th, and 15th. And those tickets will go on sale next week. And as Florence said, you can buy those tickets at Eugene O'Neil, one word, .org. And just to give you a hint, buy the tickets quickly, because when we had our Irish delegation here, and there was a series, I think, of 7 plays, fortunately, we had tickets for them, but the events were sold out, and it's really a delight to see that kind of community participation. So
I'd like to mention, Newell, that
Yeah.
Eric is a hometown boy.
yes.
He grew up in Danville. He went to San Ramon Valley High School. So he came back home, and we're glad he did.
Yes, and I was fortunate to be again back in Ireland a few weeks ago, where Eric produced 2 plays there that were just fantastic. And he did one that just brought me almost to tears, that he took a play really about what was called shell shock. And it was really based on soldiers coming back after World War I, but it's about what we would call PTSD. And he reinterpreted that in a way that was so powerful and so touching for the moment. But that's what we have to offer here in Danville, from the Museum of the San Ramon Valley, in preserving, enhancing our history, retelling stories, and telling contemporary stories, as the exhibit coming up of what was happening to people here at home during COVID. I want to thank both of you, Dan Dunn, for your absolute commitment to the highest level of bringing quality curated exhibits to the museum, and to Florence, to you and your high standards, and to the safeguard of the library and the legacy of Eugene O'Neil, and what his importance to not only to Danville, to the country and the entire world. So thank you both for being here today.
Thank you for the opportunity. We
Thank
really
you, Newell.
And we look forward to many times. Happy holidays. Don't forget, the lighting of the oak tree starts at 5 p.m. the day after Thanksgiving. Look forward to seeing everybody. We'll see you again next month as we talk with Candace Anderson about Contra Costa County and what do they do relative to Danville. Thanks a lot. See you later.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good day.